Hey everybody, it's Pastor Megan, and today I have with me.
Hi, my name is Katy Butler. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white, queer, cisgender teacher in San Francisco, California. Currently, I teach second grade, but I've also taught first grade in the past. And I am really passionate about creating gender inclusive classrooms. About 8 years ago, in my second year of teaching, I had a student who transitioned over the summer into my first grade class, and there was pretty much nothing in terms of resources specifically for elementary school teachers. And I did so much research, I looked online, and it felt like everything was geared towards middle and high school or towards adults. And I just started buying books. And honestly, since then, I've learned so much and really just try to create and curate resources for other people. So a couple years ago, me and my colleague Kieran Slattery worked together to make a website, and we called it Gender Inclusive Classrooms. And it's just a resource for people to, visit our site and learn about all the things that are out there to support the trans and non-binary kids in their classrooms. Bring it all to one space.
And I, as a personal side note, am also a fan because my child just graduated from the second grade. Thank you for helping make that a possibility.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure to be their teacher.
Yeah, so as a trans person with a trans child, know that finding people who are able to use language that doesn't give me the heebie-jeebies, or who are able to who I'm able to trust fully to talk about trans issues with my kids is a giant deal. And so
Thank you.
so in this video, we're going to give you permission to not have to speak for every single teacher on the planet, not to speak for every type of gender identity on the planet, not to have to speak for every type of race on the planet, but to just kind of provide some of your own ideas, your own reflections of what's worked in your context. And then with the hope that this helps to start a conversation, and maybe we can get some more educators on, we can get some more people who are working on writing books and who are having fun conversations about this. And so I just wanted to say that from the beginning to help kind of set a platform of expectations. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works. That's wonderful.
Okay, great. All you gotta do is be you.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce the dog that's walking behind you so that people can know that too?
Yes. So I have a stack of gender inclusive books next to me just in case. You never know when you're going to need one. And then a puppy. This is Pascal, and he's just 5 months old and has been instrumental in my distance learning and online teaching. Really felt like a part of our classroom. So he might be wandering behind me, hopefully not barking.
I like that. I've really appreciated gender inclusive classrooms. You post a lot on Instagram, which is where we get to send you little hearts and love a lot. There's readings that happen on Instagram. Can you tell us what your @ is on Instagram? And then also I think there's set times that you guys read books, right?
Yeah, so we're at Gender Inclusive Classrooms, and our website is actually genderinclassrooms.com, so a little bit different. But on Instagram and on Facebook, we're Gender Inclusive Classrooms. And the first day we were in shelter in place, Kieran and I got together. He's a fifth grade teacher in Massachusetts. We actually used to teach at the same school. And we got together and said, what can we put out there for people in this time when they're at home? And of course, our first thought was all of our trans and non-binary students, and how we don't, many of them are in safe and supportive households, but they're not necessarily getting the same kind of instruction that we would be giving them or the same kind of affirmations. So our first thought was, hey, we love books. We've got tons of books. We've never used Instagram Live, but let's give it a shot. And so it started out with me reading a picture book every single day. And I did that for about 3 weeks, and then real distance learning started, and I couldn't keep that up anymore. So I did a couple of author visits on Wednesdays, and then Kieran, as a fifth grade teacher, wanted to share books for older students. It works really well because all of my expertise is in K through 2, and he knows a lot more about 3 through 5. So we really are able to span that So we started with Melissa's Story, which was formerly known as George by Alex Gino, and read that a chapter a day for a little while, and people loved it. They loved following along. So he then read a book called Love, Penelope. And as soon as we received the sequel to George, or Melissa's Story, we decided to read that one too. So right now, every single weekday at 8 a.m. Pacific time or 11 Eastern time, Kieran is reading a chapter or two from Rick, which is Alex Gino's second book.
I think that's really fun. We read Melissa's Story in South Dakota over a winter break with family members who were doing their best to like use proper pronouns and get everything right. And it was so beautiful to watch my child reading with their grandparent. And at the same time that they're like working on getting all their pronouns right, Melissa is expressing why it's so important in their body to get all of these pronouns and words right. And so it was just a really lovely conversation to see a grandparent just really trying to help a kid sound out words, but then also like taking in like, oh, your feelings get hurt when that happens. And so it was just a really beautiful way to like be reading a book and having kind of a transformative process, which I think is a really lovely gift for kids to be able to have with family members.
Yeah.
And no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think books are often the way in for people. I mean, a lot of this started for me, particularly as a teacher. I was just trying to find books, right? Because I knew that on the first day of school, kids would see this student that they had known last year with the pronoun he, and now they were going by she, and I needed to have something ready. And when you don't feel like you have the language yet, when you're not confident yet, it's so nice to be able to pick up a book and read from that and use that as like a touchstone and a reference. And so I feel like a lot of the work we do, I mean, we have a book list, that goes K through 5. I feel like so much of the work we do is just getting books into people's hands and showing them the right kinds of books. And it's not enough, right? There's so much more that can be done, but for so many people, that's a tangible first step.
Mm-hmm. And it's really huge right now because with so many public libraries closed and so many schools closed, like books are expensive. I'm sure you know that already as a teacher, right? But like to have someone be able to read a book to you so you know that if it's the kind of book that you want your child to have in your house, or the kind of gender vocabulary that you want to have in your house is such a gift, right? Because if all we can do is order books and then pick them up on the sidewalk now, that browsing that we used to do isn't really an option. And so it's nice to know that there's people who are willing to like read books out loud so that people can kind of still browse, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's true. We actually made a list specifically to that. We made a list of all the books that are available for free on Epic, which is a website that kids can use that many students use for distance learning. And Kieran painstakingly went through and searched for every book on our book list to see which ones were available on Epic for that same reason. People just need access to these kinds of books right now, and they need to be able to see which ones fit and feel right.
What are some of the things that parents can do while they're homeschooling, regardless of the gender diversity of their own children, to just support gender inclusive vocabulary?
So I think we have a year-long curriculum that we developed, and we're in the second phase of sort of redeveloping it. And the first thing that comes to mind is in January and February, the theme is unlearning the universal he. And I feel like that's a wonderful place for families to start. A lot of the work we do with gender inclusive classrooms is, yes, about books and reading, but it's also once you start to think in a different way, you start to notice how gender permeates everything we do and all of our language. And so it's really about shifting that and interrupting yourself and teaching students and children to interrupt themselves and you. And so unlearning the universal he is all about how we automatically gender things with he very quickly. You see this in picture books. I went to the library a couple months ago just trying to find books where there weren't pronouns assigned to different characters or animals. And it was very rare. And almost every book that did just have an animal in it was assigned the pronoun he. You see this online with videos. You see it when parents are talking, to their stuffed animals and what is he doing. So I think one of the first pieces is just that awareness of how am I gendering the things that I see and the things that are in our house. And kids are so great at sounding the alarm. Like, you just have to tell them, this is something I'm working on, or this is something I want to work on as a family. I'm noticing that when I see your stuffed animals, every time I pick up the lion, I say he. But like, why am I saying he for all of your stuffed animals? That's something I want to work on. And believe, like, as a teacher, whenever I tell that to my class, they're like, you did it again. Like, you said he, and it's an easy place to start, and to just start, when you're out or you see someone or your child is pointing someone out, say, oh, let's say they, or we can't tell someone's gender just by looking at them. We don't know this person's gender. Let's just say they until we know. And once you start to do that enough, and once you do it with stuffed animals, once you do it in books, once you do it as you meet people in the world, you just start to unlearn this binary that's so ingrained in us, but also sort of the sexist history of just always saying he for everything. So I think that would be a great place to start, is with language, and certainly with sharing that and being really transparent with your kids and saying, this is something I'm working on. Like, you can call me out every time you hear me say he. If I don't know the pronouns, tell me to stop and let's say they, or let's find out what the person's pronouns are.
Dominique has been choosing that whenever a word has men in it, because Dominique has discovered that a lot of words have men in it, even words like woman, that they're going to spell it min now, because it doesn't make sense to make that word men. And so we were doing prayers the other night, and I said, a woman, and Dominique was like the most happy that they have, like, what? That word had men in it and I didn't even notice this whole time, and like, it doesn't need to be there and we can change it. And so there really is a true delight in this idea that you can play with language and figure out how you want to describe things. I also think there's something about the times we're living in where people have half of their face covered, that like, it's a great time to learn how to use they with people in public, because you have fewer of the identifiers that we thought helped us. Right. And so it's just a great time to figure out some of those language things, I think.
Definitely. And I think it's really powerful for your kids to see you learning alongside them, and to know that this is something that you're working on as well. I think it empowers them to see that, we make mistakes. We're all learning. This is something we're all trying as a family. And we actually, going back to the woman and human, that came up in our classroom because we were doing the work around the universal he, and we did this activity, which is actually free on our website. It's a lesson that's free, all about what's another word for fireman. And so we had gone through all of the professions that are inherently gendered in the name, and then thought of different options. And right away, kids started noticing all of the ways that words are gendered. And one student in particular noticed that human had man in it and was furious. And there's actually a post on our Instagram where I show what they did and how they rewrote the word with an I. And that became a thing in our classroom. We tried to pronounce it like it had a short I, and we tried to make sure every time we found those words that had men or man in them, that we were putting an X or an I instead. So I'm glad to see that they're still continuing that work.
Yeah, it's still alive. I can't wait to see what happens in church on Sunday. Yeah. So you have a stack of books next to you. What are some of your favorite gender inclusive books, or at least the ones that you had at home when Shelter in Place started?
Yeah, I had pretty much none at home, but got to go back to my classroom, and that was one of the only things that I brought back with me, because they are such an important part of my life. So I would say, if people are always looking for like the one book or the book to start with, and for a while that question was kind of frustrating to me, because I feel like there's so much work that can be done, and we would try to do things about the books you already have in your library, because honestly, any book can be made a book about gender. Any book can lead to conversations about gender, often in ways we don't think about, even if it's just using a sticky note and changing the pronouns in the book. But if I were to recommend one book that I feel like is, the most illustrative right now represents Own Voices, which means it was written by a trans person and illustrated by a Black artist. It would be When Aiden Became a Brother, which is by Kyle Lukoff and Kailani Juanita. And this book is fantastic. It's fantastic for many reasons. One of them is that it's not just a book about a kid who is trans. And that was such a breath of fresh air for me, because when I started this 8 years ago with my student, I could only find books about white kids. It was pretty much only books about white boys who wore skirts or dresses. And that's still a huge part of the literature. That's still most of what's out there. But the whole story was about how they wanted to play with dolls, they were trans, they were non-binary. And this story starts out by telling you about Aiden and about how Aiden was assigned female at birth. But that's just like the beginning of the story, because really what's happening is that Aiden's going to have a younger sibling. And so it just kind of opens up the narrative a little bit more. And it's like, yeah, trans kids can be trans kids, but like they also sometimes have new family members join in. And what I really appreciate about the book too is that the illustrations tell just as much information as the words, if not more. There's just fabulous stuff in the illustrations where the more you read it, you're like, oh, look at that. There's a book with baby names and it's all crossed out. And, Aiden's trying to pick a name for their siblings so that no matter what their gender identity is, it will fit them. So this would definitely be the number one book that I would recommend.
I love it. I'm going to put a list of all the books down here too, so that people can find them and don't have to scribble while you're talking.
Great.
Just so they know that while you're talking.
Awesome. Should I show another one?
Yeah.
All right. So I really tried to highlight books that feature kids of color, because like I was saying, I feel like so much of the literature has been for the past 8 years and continues to be white children. And I also want to highlight own voice books. So books that are written by people who actually have the experience. Another one that I really love is really short and sweet. It's called Free to Be Incredible Me by Joelle Elizabeth Retner. And it's a true story about Joe's child who just likes to explore their gender and likes to wear different kinds of things. And the author is Black and the child in the book is Black. And it's very good for young children. I would say, 3 years and up could totally love this book. And it's kind of reminiscent of My Princess Boy, which was one of the original texts, but isn't always my favorite. It still feels like it jumps into binary stereotypes. So this one is just a lot more fun. Free to Be Incredible Me. One of my personal favorites is, this would maybe be my number 2 favorite, is From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea by Kai Chang Tom. And I love this one because it's one of the few books out there that actually uses they and them pronouns for a child, and explains that this child wants to be lots of things and is creative and jubilant, and then goes to school and people are like, which are you? And they don't know how to choose. They don't want to choose. They try to choose and it doesn't feel right. And so this is a fantastic book for introducing non-binary identities, introducing they and them. And it is also an own voice book with just gorgeous illustrations. So I love that. And I actually got this book and this one at Dog-Eared Books in the Castro. They have one of the best selections of LGBTQ books for children. And Marcus Ewart, who wrote 10,000 Dresses, actually works there.
Ooh.
Very well curated. But The Boy in the Bindi is also an excellent book by Vivek Shraya. And it's a simple story of a boy who one day is watching his mom get dressed and sees her put on a bindi and asks if he can put one on too. And it just opens his world to amazing possibilities and all the ways that he could be and he could look.
You mean there's more ways to be than just a mermaid?
More ways to be. I know. And this one too, he's got the character has got all of these different things going on at once, which is pretty amazing. On every page, they are a tiger and then they're an orca and then they're combining all these things together.
I love it.
Yeah. This book I really love, and I actually had the privilege of meeting the author at the Gender Spectrum conference last year, which is amazing. And there's a professional symposium that's taking place in July, and Kieran and I will be presenting. And it's really open to, caregivers and medical providers and teachers. It's wonderful. They had to cancel the conference, unfortunately, which is really the best part for the kids. But so this is by Teresa Thorne, and it's called It Feels Good to Be Yourself, a book about gender identity. And Teresa herself doesn't identify as trans, but has a daughter who's trans. And so this is sort of written to her daughter and about their experience. And what I love about it is that it does feature a lot of different kids, kids of color, and it explains the terms in incredibly useful and incredibly easy to understand language, specifically around non-binary and transgender. And then there's a resource section in the back so that families can get more information if they'd like to. And then I also really love Juliana's a Mermaid by Jessica Love. Yeah, this one is just a beautiful book. And there's a second one coming out, a sequel, where Juliana is going to be in a wedding. And it's all about the wedding from the kids' perspective. So they're like under the tables and watching what's happening. But this book is just gorgeous. It's full of, amazing pictures of mermaids and people swimming and on the subway. And it's just an easy primer. It's great for young kids. It's so accepting. I love a book where there's no conflict about the kid having a different gender identity or presenting differently. I feel like so many of the early books that came out, even, this one, which I love, it's like the child goes to school and has a hard time. But Julian never has a hard time. He's just completely accepted. His grandma's accepting. And it's just a breath of fresh air sometimes to read those conflict-free books.
Yeah. And Julian gets to go to a party of like people all who are kind of the same.
Yeah. It's really empowering. I love that one. Yeah. And the final recommendation, or the final one in this pile, is Queer Heroes, which is by Arabelle Sicardi. And there's another new book, Rainbow Revolutionaries, that I think just came out. I haven't received my copy yet, but I love a good anthology. And this is great for older students, older elementary and even middle and high school. And I read it out loud to second graders, but it's amazing to have so many different people all represented in one book, with, short little vignettes about each one. And you can read one every night at bedtime, investigate one that you're more curious about with your family. So I highly recommend Queer Heroes.
Yeah, I think I've heard a couple chapters being read on Instagram. Yeah. That's I love that you not only know the books, but you know the authors, and good gossip about what's coming next.
That's what happens on Instagram. I don't know. I mean, you just get plugged into these things. Jessica Love actually came and did a reading of Juliana's a Mermaid for us, and Teresa Thorne came and did a reading of this one for us with us on Instagram.
Well, we're pondering in our family having a summer kids book writing contest for kids who are trans or gender diverse in whatever way that they're gender averse, to write some books. And the good ones, because we do some book publishing, if people want to publish them and have them exist in the real world to inspire some kids to do that. We have to figure out some good prizes, though. I'm thinking some of these books might be some good prizes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I would love to get more voices of students in my classroom library and their experience. That would be incredible.
Yeah. So stay tuned
for
the Roar Family Book Challenge or whatever. We got to come up with something with good alliteration or something.
I've got so many kids to send your way who would be interested in that.
I'm excited, if only so my kid stops talking about how sewers work. Thank you for that video.
Yeah.
Roll in our house as well.
Sorry about that. It's fascinating though.
Every day. No. So I guess my one of the questions that I have for you as kind of a wrap up is, what is a good way for parents and especially grandparents, because I think a lot of grandparents want to do supportive things, to support creativity in kids, even if they might live in a place that's unsafe, or if not everyone in their family is safe? Do you know ways that people can kind of match conversations about welcome and creativity with trying to figure out when the world is safe and how to determine kind of how to go in and out of spaces where there might be bullying?
Yeah, that's a great question. As someone who has only lived in incredibly liberal places, Northampton, Massachusetts, San Francisco, California, and is not a parent, I may not be the best person to answer that question, but I will direct everyone to Gender Spectrum. They do amazing work, and they actually have grandparent groups and parent groups that are led, and a lot of the people that are in those spaces are the people that would usually come to the Gender Spectrum conference in July. And once that is back up, I would highly recommend anyone. They love having grandparents there. They do specific groups for grandparents. I would recommend having families go there because the experience from what I see when I'm there, is a bunch of families from all over the country that are sometimes in those spaces that aren't as safe, suddenly finding community and suddenly finding families that are like theirs and kids that are like theirs. So I would definitely go to genderspectrum.org and check out their community spaces. They have spaces for kids, for teens. They have tons of resources, but I think their online chats and community groups would be a really good first step.
Yeah, I what I love about Gender Spectrum when it's possible to be there in person is that the kids get to go to this like magic sparkle rainbow unicorn pony club all day long, where they're like freer than they've ever been. Yeah. And then the parents get to go ask tough questions, like adult level questions, to like experts in the field, or to be in support groups with people who can just worry about the same thing, but they're able to do that on their own while their kids are having this amazing like freedom experience. And what ends up happening is all of the like expert questions that get answered obviously are super important, but the biggest learning that people leave with is like, I spent my whole week in fear and we could have played unicorn sparkle, but like they're jealous that the kids got to have all this freedom, and they want their kids to feel that good all the time.
Yeah.
And so they get rid of all of the brain questions, and they just have this really great heart experience that they try to like live in the rest of their life when they come home.
Yeah, it's so important. And there are other conferences like Gender Odyssey kind of flips between Seattle and San Diego and does similar programming. And then there's the Gender Conference New York City, which does that as well on the East Coast. And obviously, Gender Odyssey, I think, canceled for this year. Gender Spectrum is only doing the symposium online, and Gender Conference New York City is also only doing the professional part online, I believe. But yes, once those things are up and running again, it's transformative for me to go, and I work with the infants and toddlers when I'm there. But just seeing those families like come back and having been given the space in that way, and then to see how much their children are shining, it's a magical experience.
Well, I'm delighted that you shared some time with us. Is the best way for people to connect with you, if they want to connect with you, through Instagram?
Probably, yeah. We are also on Facebook. Kieran sort of manages the Facebook side, and I manage the Instagram side, and we're at Gender Inclusive Classrooms on both of those. We're also at Gmail, so genderinclusiveclassrooms@gmail.com.
Well, thank you for being a compassionate, a patient, and very creative, involved teacher. I get to say that because it's true.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for having us today. I'm sorry that Kieran couldn't be here too, but I will also share with you the names specifically of some Black queer educators that are doing some of this work as well, and that also couldn't be here today, but wanted me to pass along the kinds of work that they're doing, and they're on Instagram as well.
Yeah, we'll keep the conversation going.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.